are still some seats up in this area. Evidently, these are the more expensive seats because they've not gone yet. We have some people standing, and I'm sure it's not out of respect to me, so there you go. We've got a place for you. We are talking tonight about rocks, and there's a reason for that. Someone came in and they said, how to date a rock. And I said, do scientists get more lonely than you could ever imagine? No, it doesn't mean that. The greatest stumbling block for most believers when it comes to accepting the account in Genesis chapter 1 is the length of time that we are told this universe has been around. That is number one stumbling block. People will say, if we were created like it says, and we were all thrown in there, why does the fossil record say what it says? And why can we date the rocks to being millions and millions of years old? Well, let's have a good look at this, shall we? Even mathematicians who are committed evolutionists have admitted in print, many of them recently, that 30 billion years is not long enough for random chance to produce a molecule if you start with all of the ingredients as a given. In other words, not something from nothing, but the something's already there. Now let's let a molecule arise spontaneously from it, that when they run the odds in the computer simulations, no matter how much you tweak it, even 30 billion years is not long enough. Many of you are a lot older than you know. You see, when I went to school, I can still remember whenever they said that the universe was nearly 1 billion years old. And now it's nearing 10 billion. I'm doing some math in my head here that is very disappointing, quite frankly. What's going on is that there's not enough time to do what they want to happen. And yet they will still confidently talk about millions of years. Remember this, real history, the stuff we can go back and check on, peters out 5,500, 6,000 years ago. And from nothing underneath that comes full-fledged civilization. People already planting, people already doing, and before anyone says, but wait a minute, what about the cavemen? Well, if you even go and get the evolutionists' own dates, you will find that there were people planting and there were people doing all kinds of nice civilized things. At the same time, other people were living very poor, primitive lives, just like today. There wasn't one large grand march. And in fact, a lot of tribes that are living in incredible primitive circumstances today didn't used to. They used to have a very intact and very active civilization. I can think, for example, we almost moved to Tasmania. There's not a joke actually attached to that, although there should be. I was asked to go there and do some work, and that's where my wife and I were about to go whenever some friends in Scotland said, wait a minute, if you're willing to leave America, come home, we need you. So we went to Scotland instead. But in Tasmania, the Tasmanian Aboriginals, the natives that are there, if you look back and look at their relics, they had the wheel, they had fire, they had agriculture, they had art, they had music. But when the Europeans found them, they had nothing. They were living like cave dwellers. They had once had it and lost. This one big march of human history is untrue. Well, there are a lot of other things that are untrue as well. You see, nobody was around when the rocks were laid down. The only witness we have gave us a book, and we question it. So let's talk about this a little bit. First of all, do you know how you date rocks? And no jokes there either. It's you don't date them by their appearance. You can't pick up a rock and go, oh, this one's an old one. In fact, rocks that are loose and unconsolidated can sometimes be old and sometimes young. And some rocks which are dense and indurated are very young instead of being very old. They're also not dated by their petrologic character. And I'm sorry, but tonight won't be as full of laughs as last night because we've got to use words like petrologic, which there's no reason in the world to use these words. It just means the rocky kind of character that it is. All kinds, shale, granite, limestone, conglomerate, sandstones can be old or young. So it's not the kind of rock either. Well, then do we date them by the minerals that are in them? No. There is no relationship between the minerals or the ores that are in a rock and how old the scientist will tell you that the rock is. They're not dated by the rocks that are next to them. They're not dated by where they are found in the earth. And I bet you thought they were. They're not. They are not dated radiometrically either. In other words, people say, well, what about carbon-14? Can't use it since rocks were never alive. You can only use carbon-14 on things that were alive. And the man that invented it and won all the prizes for it spent the rest of his life begging people to stop misusing it because it was only accurate to about 6,000 to 15,000 years. After that, it goes wildly off. And yet people still will try to date something. Carbon-14 dates this at 150,000 years. I'm sorry, but that's rather like, and the best way I can do this, and if you're offended by firearms, you're not going to like this, but what can I say? I'll tell you what, if you don't like it, I'll leave and not be back next week. Sometimes in the old westerns, John Wayne would pull out of his pistol while he was on a galloping horse, and he would shoot at somebody else on a galloping horse in the next county, and they would fall off the horse. The only way that would ever happen is if the person over there is laughing at John Wayne for trying to use a pistol at that distance. A pistol has a very short barrel, and it has a very short aiming radius. That's the big part we're looking at. Distance between front sight and back sight. But if you stretch that out a bit, you can reach out and touch that guy over there. Probably not on a horse if he's on a horse, but you can do a lot more damage. Carbon-14 is a very short radius tool. It doesn't work well long radius. Well, what about that other stuff like uranium and lead and rubidium and strontium? The rocks don't give that off. They don't date that way. And in fact, you know the geological column that you've seen with all the ages on it? That column was designed before any radiometric dating of any kind was ever invented. All that they have done with the radiometric dating is try to back up the column they've already got. It never moved after the radiometrics. If you're thinking, oh, wait a minute, in fact, you may not be aware of this, but unless you are a graduate student. Now, if you're a junior in college right now, and you're a geology major, you're having a hissy fit. That's the technical psychological term. And all I can do really is tell you, hold on. If you're going to be a geologist, they do have to tell you this, but they don't tell you this at the undergrad level. In fact, normally you're in your PhD studies and you're well too invested in this to back up by the time you find out that over 95% of all the dates they do get through radiometrics are tossed because they don't fit the preconceived date that has already been assigned. That is a major scandal. And yet it is true. I have said this at more than 30 universities in the last 10 years, and nobody has been able to stand up and go against it. And you say, I'm not all that brave. I'm not going to stand up and say something stupid. Well, not on purpose. Last night I said Lamarck when I met Haeckel. That was kind of dumb, but it wasn't on purpose. You can correct that on the tape. If you're wondering, well, what is that all about? Then you didn't pay attention, and there will be a test later, and you're in big trouble. What are rocks dated by? They're dated by the fossils that are found around the rocks. Oh, so you date the fossils. Not the way you think. They are not dated by being pulled and gone through radiometrically. Again, we'll explain radiometric here in a bit. They are dated by where the evolutionist says they have to be in this march of time. They're dated by the theory, by no science at all, period. I can still remember the point of geological interest. I knew it was a point of geological interest because there was a sign saying so. And we were on a field trip, and I thought that meant we got to go look at some lovely fields, but evidently I was mistaken. We had to go to this place. And there were these rock strata, and the scientist pulled one rock that was a little loose and pulled it off, and he says, this rock is 50 million years old. I said, how do you know that? And he said, because it's in this strata. I said, how do you know the strata is 50 million years old? And he said, and I am not making it up, because I found this rock in it. The sad thing is nobody else in the class got that, and I looked at him. I said, you realize there's a problem with that? He said, we know there's a problem with that, but we are working on it. I said, it's something that should be brought up. This is not something we should sit on. This is something which should be on the billboard somewhere. Friends, how do you date them? By where you want the rocks. Specifically, you date them by something called an index fossil. An index fossil is something which was alive, and it was all over the place, but not for long. It died off, and we have some fossil record of it. That way, they'll say, this will provide an unambiguous identification of its age because it only lived during a certain point. It's rather like if you're a linguist, Gothic. If you're a linguist, every linguist eventually has to learn Gothic, a language that only lived for a few hundred years, but it went everywhere. Then the civilization that gave it birth collapsed, locked it solid, and that's an index language now. Well, fossils are rather like that. Index fossils, however, are not dated by anything other than evolutionary presupposition. In other words, where I say they have to be. They are not dated by anything else. I have had a man hold the entire fossil find in his hand, consisting of a bit of an ankle, a bit of a kneecap, and a bit of, I think it was an arm bone, maybe the radius. And he said this was of a creature, and he described this half-hairy beast that lived up in trees, ate this, did that, and the like. And I'm looking at his hand. I said, what other examples do you have? He said, we have about this much more of another one we found. And I said, and you can tell it lived in trees. Did it write that in the sand before it died? And he began to talk to me about, no, because of the age where this would have needed to be, they could not have been yet land dwellers. So there's no science. It's a just so story, is what it is. It's a made-up story, and this gets very old after a while. Fossils do not reveal evolution. You've seen the geological column. It doesn't exist anywhere. Nowhere. We'll give you the facts on that one in the second bit. By the way, I think it's interesting. They said at the break, you have about 10 minutes. You can go fill out a form to hear the tapes. And I'm thinking, fill out a form, hit the snacks. Fill out a form. I'm going to lose to the cookies tonight. I can just tell. And please, and I brought this up again last night, but I don't copyright what I do. If you get some tapes, you want to make copies, copy the things. It's fine. Just go ahead and use them. The Lord gave us all of nature to study and learn of Him, and He's not charging. So how can I charge for that? However, to the elders, I do need paid for the plane ticket. Thank you. You never know. About once a year, I do get a hearty handshake for a thank you. And I'm going, oh no, I'm in trouble. The creation model is not bound like the evolutionary model. We have a lot more freedom than they do. Because whatever we see, we can work in and say, all right, if it's truth, we can deal with it. They can't. It has to fit within the frame, or they panic. Evolutionary thought is very circular. And I need to give you a real example of how this happens. First of all, you do know, let's say that this pulpit was made out of uranium. Uranium, therefore, would be the parent element. Over time, uranium, which is unstable, throws off a bit. We're trying to keep this so untechnical. Throws off a bit and becomes lead. And after a while, you have more lead and less uranium until eventually the theory goes, you will have all lead. All right? The lead would be the daughter element. Uranium is the parent element. All right. Very simple. We know, looking at the current processes that we can see of uranium, that it would take millions of years for most uranium to go to lead. And so they say, what we're going to do is we're going to measure the rate, and that'll tell us how old the rock is. Wait a minute. There are a lot of presuppositions there. You're presupposing that there was no lead in the rock to begin with. You're presupposing that no uranium or lead have leached in or out of that rock. You're presupposing that the rate never changes. A lot of presuppositions. And so I decided, let's try out the assumption. I found a fossilized clam. Oh, don't get too impressed. They're all over the place. So found the fossilized clam, took it in. Said, Mr. Geology Professor, could you date this? He says, can't help you. Only igneous rock can be radiometrically dated. Igneous means rock that was heated up so much that it turned liquid and then cooled again. And that didn't happen to the fossil. I'm going, well, then how do you date the fossil? He says, you got to take that over to a biologist. A biologist for a rock. Fair enough, right. So I went over, Said, can you date the rock? He looks at the fossil and he grabs books on fossilized clams. Friends, I thought I did not have a life. But if you can write a book on fossilized clams, God love you, but you're probably not going to reproduce, if you get my drift. So he pulls off the book. He finds this and he goes, oh, our luck, this clam only lived for a certain amount of time. It's an index fossil. This clam lived 320 million years ago. Now I'm still a little disturbed because nobody has ever measured the rock, tested the rock, checked the rock. It's all done by the evolutionary book that tells you where it must be. So I'm a little concerned. And I say, how do you date the majority of rocks? They have no fossils in them. He says, well, you just keep looking for fossils near the rocks. That doesn't sound right. Well, come back later with some igneous rock, some hardened lava. Take it to the geology professor saying, now he can help me. And he goes, no, really can't. I don't know what they do. He sent me to the geophysics department. Okay, so I went to the geophysics department. He says, oh, we can date this. In fact, he was way too excited. We can date this using radiometric isotope dating techniques. Here's how we do it. We take a section of your rock and we crush it and we measure, again, trying not to do this too technical, the bits coming off of it and what's left. I go, okay, do that. So the rock is ground into powder, certain minerals are isolated, a computer analyzes the ratio, solves the equation, gives the age. And after about 6 weeks, he calls me back, says, we got your results. Oh, good, so I come on in. We tried it with the uranium-lead method, and it said it was 500 million years old, plus or minus 20 million. It's a bit larger fudge factor than I was going for. But, all right, thank you. And he goes, then we ran it through another method, the potassium-argon method. Oh, okay. And what did it say? It said it's 100 million years old, plus or minus 2 million.